Okay, we are now going to walk through creating a Git repo and making a couple commits, making a branch, merging the branches, which we talked about earlier, and now we're going to get our hands-on kind of practice. I accidentally was recording to the Zoom cloud, and that's not what we want to do because we want to upload it to YouTube. So really the first thing to do here is, and I'm going to switch back and forth like this, and I will do my best to do this at a good pace because I know that can be a little off-putting over Zoom. If you have a second monitor, I would just recommend pulling up this page that's in the Zoom chat and having it up as a reference because I will be walking through this, and that will probably be a bit easier for you to have like that up and your VS Code and the Zoom. So please do code along. I'll do some check-ins. I think what'll work is, maybe just if we need a pause or a question, raise your hand. And actually, if you do get stuck at any point, or I'm moving too fast, actually, please do let me know. I want to take back what I said earlier. And the reason is, what I've discovered through teaching is that if one person has a question, it usually means there's at least 5 other people wondering the same thing. So it will actually be a huge help for everyone. So please do raise any and all questions and issues. I'll keep an eye out, and I'll probably ask for like thumbs up emojis or something to know when we're ready to move forward. So step 1 here is, let me close this out. I need to do one thing before I forget. And speaking of best practices, keeping everything organized is a really good best practice. And I don't want to forget to delete this Git repository that I created earlier because I actually don't want it here for how I have things organized. And the amazing thing about Git is that it's all just files under the hood. So the way to delete a repository is you just delete that Git directory. You can also delete the directory that it's in, but I have other stuff in here that I actually want to keep, so I'm not going to do that. And now, lo and behold, I'm not in a Git repo anymore. And let me get rid of foo.py because I don't need that either. So the one thing that you all do want to do is, if you haven't, in your home directory, which you can get to just by typing cd or cd tilde, make a projects directory. I already made this the other day. You're going to want somewhere to put stuff. I actually just call my projects directory code. You could do that if you prefer. It doesn't really matter. I'll go into projects for the purposes of demonstration here. And I have some stuff from yesterday. Some students like to organize the projects by week and day. Like you could create a directory and everything for today's class goes in day 1. Some people like to organize it by sort of course module, the way we have it organized in Git right now. Or you could just not organize it and just remember kind of the names of stuff. It's really up to you. For now, how you organize it doesn't matter, especially since we're just starting out and you're going to have plenty of time to rearrange stuff. So, and let me actually pull up my guide code. So I'm going to go back and forth, but I also want to make sure that I can refer to it. So in our projects directory, we're going to make my first repo, which is probably not everyone's first repo. So please go ahead and create that directory named my first repo. And note that we haven't made a Git directory yet. We've just created a normal directory that we're going to put the Git directory in. And now please navigate into it. And I always do pwd after every other command to make sure where I'm supposed to be. you can run ls space -a to make sure that there's nothing in here. And then the command that will create and initialize our Git repository, git init. Everybody good so far? Cool. I'll check in, but again, if you want me to go over a step again or repeat a step, please raise your hand or just speak up so I know. I run git status after every single command. And now we have a repo. If I type ls space -a again, I see that .git directory, and that's where all the information about this repo is stored. That's what the Git program looks for. So let's create some files here so we have some stuff to play with. And I'm going to type clear just to clean stuff up a bit. Let's see if this works doing it all on one line. I'm actually not certain. Code is the command line program to run VS Code. So doing this by itself creates a file named code. It actually creates this file and opens it up in VS Code. I'm curious if, like for a lot of other command line programs for creating files, you can create a bunch at once. And lo and behold, that works too. So go ahead and create these 3 files and open them in VS Code. Code example txt, code example py, example.js. In the text file, let's just type hello world and remember to save. If you get this pop-up, which you very well may, you can just close it or hit never or hit yes if you want. Hit always. I do not use VS Code's built-in sort of visual aid for Git and GitHub. Some people like it. I think the command line is really the right focus for learning and getting started, because the visual tools are never quite as good as one hopes, though it does give some interesting information. Like we can see in here, I'm not even that familiar with this tool, so I'm not going to get too distracted. And let's go ahead and in our Python file, let's put a print statement and save that as well. A lot of people like to turn on autosave. And if you're in doubt, I would recommend it. Just turn it on. I'm so used to hitting the save hotkey like all the time that I don't worry about it anymore. I am my own autosave, but Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P opens up VS Code's command palette. And if you type in autosave, the toggle autosave option will come up, and I would recommend turning it on.
Adam, I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
When you LSA the directory that you're in now, would you see the 3 files you just made, the examples, JS, Python, and TXT?
I do, except for the JS file, because I have not saved it yet. So are you not seeing them?
Yes, like they didn't, yeah.
Have you saved the file?
That's probably the reason.
Yeah, it's either that or it is easy to get confused and be in the wrong directory in the terminal. But like actually this is a good teaching moment. So example.js, this little circle over here, that's VS Code telling me this file has changes that are not saved. Note that there's not one here and not one here. Because you raise a really good point, because if I did touch example JS, that creates the file. That actually creates a file in our file system, right? In the Linux file system, in the Mac file system. I misspoke a little bit. The code command, it doesn't actually create the file. I apologize. I misspoke. It opens up, I don't know if VS Code calls it a buffer. Some other programs call it buffers, but it opens up a new tab with that file name. But until we save it, it's not actually, the file isn't actually saved. And I can go ahead and save this as an empty file, which I just did. And now that dot is gone. And now, so ls shows you everything in your directory that doesn't start with a dot. ls-a shows you everything plus the stuff that starts with dots. And note that even though example.js is empty, once I save the file, now it actually exists and it's there. So are you seeing those files now?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, great question. And that actually raised a couple really valuable things to touch on. So thank you. Any other questions? Cool. So let's just add a console log statement to our JavaScript file too. And I'm going to go ahead and type clear in the terminal just so I can keep things organized. The one thing that drives me nuts about VS Code, and I should figure out how to do this with other editors, that control tilde hotkey will just jump you back and forth between editing and the terminal. With VS Code, it will close it out. And it drives me a little nuts. And actually, as soon as I'm talking about it, I'm actually doing a little Google search that, yeah, this is a rabbit hole. There is a way to change it, but we have to go into like settings and stuff. So I'm not going to worry about it. So I do end up using the mouse. I'm so used to using the keyboard that I just really like it. So anyway, going back to our terminal, let's do git status. On branch main, the default branch, which is by default named main. No commits yet because we just initialized our repository. Untracked files. And where's the diagram that I want? Untracked files. Git knows the files are there because we've created the repository, but it is not doing anything with them. Like, as far as Git knows, like the cookies and the cupcakes and the muffins aren't even on the baking tray. They're just like sitting on the counter.
Ed, I just have a quick question.
Yes,
And I think they're the same. I just want to make sure. Between mine says like master on branch master,
Mhm.
and sometimes it'll switch to main. Is that kind of just? Is there a difference between those? Or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the important thing here is that Git has, it's called, first of all, a default branch. That is, when you create a new Git repository, we have to have at least one branch. So Git creates it right away. And what do we name it? For a long time, it was named master by default. Like the terms master and slave have like a pretty long history going back in electrical engineering. But for a lot of reasons that in a lot of ways make a lot of sense, like those terms are also really historically loaded. So a lot of the tech industry basically switched the norm where the default branch is now called main. There is a setting where you can declare what the name of that default branch should be. I recommend using main because that is now Git and GitHub's default. So it makes life simpler. That said, if, to be honest, I lose a little bit track of, you know, it depends on like if you clone a repo and they've set the default branch to master, then that's what it'll be. So it doesn't really matter the name of the branch as long as you know what like that main branch is and its name. So like if you're using and then we just have to know as convention, like, all right, what's our source branch? And it should be main or master. So as long as you have one of them, or even if you have two, just pick one and use that one as your main branch. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Totally. Yeah. No, good question. Um, any other questions or things people would like me to step through again or dig into a bit before I move on?
I have a question about something I ran into yesterday that I didn't really ask about. I kind of just was like, whatever, I'll figure it out later. Yesterday when we were going over like cloning the repo and stuff like that using a future assignment we're gonna be doing.
Mhm.
One of the issues I had was after I cloned it, and then when I was putting it into like my own personal repository where I made it on GitHub and then tried to clone it on like my local machine, I was
Mhm.
getting some weird error about like an upstream link. And then I ended up finding like a fix that pretty much I think it just forced it by putting like a -F to just force it up because the issue, like the fix was correct, but it wasn't taking it until I put that -F. Is that kind of like a character you don't want to just be using all the time? Is it like a special, does it stand for force, I guess?
Yeah, -F does stand for force. There are sometimes good reasons to use it. -F also stands for force for other things, by the way. That rm-rf command to delete a directory. The F stands for force. Without it, you'll get prompted, do you want to delete every file in the directory? So that's a convention you'll see in a lot of places. With Git and stuff, just remind me towards the end of the lesson actually, because we're going to walk through that flow later. So I'd rather talk about that then. And actually, Matthew, let me make a note of that. Do you prefer Matt or Matthew, by the way?
Normally most people just call me Matt because less syllables. So, but I personally don't care. I'll answer
Cool.
whatever.
All right, Matt, sounds good. Yeah, remind me, I've got a note as well. We'll come back to it later. Yeah, the upstream stuff, when you create a new branch, you need to run this like set upstream command that Git tells you, but we'll talk about that when we get there. There's a couple pieces there. Yeah, what other questions do people have? Okay. Oh, Andrew, please. Sorry, I missed your hand up there. Yes, sir.
Oh yeah, so when we're talking about staging, I wonder, is it analogous to having a Word document open, like opening a Word document, typing something in, but not saving it?
It's a little bit in the middle because when you stage something, Git will prevent you from doing some things that could delete that. But unlike with a Word document, so I guess it actually kind of, well, does Word still like give you a pop-up warning if you try to quit before you've saved your changes?
No.
Yeah. So actually this raises a really good point. What Google Docs does is I don't think you even tell Google Docs to save, it's just auto-saving all the time. And VS Code, we can set autosave, right? And these days, my guess is Word probably autosaves. But back in the day, autosave was not yet a thing. And I'm pretty sure what Word would do was, or if it didn't, it should have. If you try to quit before you've saved your changes, there's a pop-up and it stops you from doing that so you don't accidentally lose your work. And that is a really good analogy for adding and staging in Git. We haven't really seen it. And actually, I should do maybe like a quick Google search. But when you stage something, it will like prevent it will prevent you from doing certain things that could delete it. I'm actually doing a quick Google search to see if there's a good. Yeah, I'm looking, I'll share this on Stack Overflow. The answers here, they're all like I was using baking. Someone else is like, the staging area is like a cache of files you want to commit. A dump truck with the stuff you want. A magical place where the selected files will be turned into stone. The reception desk at the library where you put the books for the library to check out, which is all a fancy way of saying we're all using bad metaphors. On a practical level, staging does mean, like, I think Git will prevent you from getting rid of those changes entirely. But on a practical level, more so, you guys don't have to worry about this, but as projects get bigger and more complex, I might be working on these 3 different files, but maybe I really only want to commit 2 of them. So sort of that adding and staging process helps me manage that. Like, to use my baking analogy, maybe I want to bake the muffins first because they're quicker. So I'm going to put just the muffins on the tin and then put them in, but I've still got the cake that's up next. But let's just dive in and do some stuff with this, because then we can play with it a little bit, which I think will help clarify it. So let's go ahead and git add example. Let's add our JavaScript file. And if you hit tab, it'll autocomplete, and then you can just add the J and hit tab again. So everyone please do git add. And then of course, git status. And this is the state of our Git repository now. And state is always, I think, a little tricky to define. But if you have a program and you have a bunch of variables and you have a for loop, a state, like, you can see it in a debugger. If you freeze your program at a moment in time, what are the values of all those variables? What is the value, which iteration are we in the for loop? If you like those movies where suddenly time freezes and like the chef is like throwing the omelet or the pizza up in the air and it's frozen and this and that, like, that's the idea of state, like capturing how everything is at a moment in time. So this is the state of our Git repository. These 2, Git knows they exist, but we can delete them and nothing happens. This, it isn't committed, it isn't cooked and saved for all time, but it's not just totally ignored either. And to kind of go back to your question, Andrew, to reiterate, here's my JS file. And if I do rm example.js, if I delete that file, note Git still has that file staged. This has not changed, even though I deleted the file, because, so this is the one thing that staging does that's a little special, right? It's not like the cake isn't baked, it's not 100%, but Git is giving us some protection for our work. So it's a pretty good idea, just add as you go and commit and do it in small chunks. Now, if I ran this git add example.js again, this is a little weird, but if I do git add, I guess I actually need to use rm instead of add, because I think add might make it a little funky, but let's see what happens. I added that deletion change. So I basically unstaged the file and like made the delete actually happen. And now I'm actually gonna put it back so that we can, work with it and stuff. Josh, yes, sir.
Yeah, I made the directory projects and I made the three files, the example text, Python and JavaScript, and trying to change directory to the projects, and it's saying that it's not found.
Um, it is probably then in a different place than you thought it was. I would try using like tab to autocomplete when you're typing out like the path to make sure you have it right. I would also use a little bit of ls. To be honest, if it's easier, what you can also do is, you know, a Mac has Finder, and I'm sure Windows has an equivalent. Like you could use a visual tool. I use something to confirm the path to your projects directory, and my guess is that that's probably the issue.
So I just tried making a new directory projects again, and it says projects read-only file system.
Got it. This, I'm not sure. I apologize. I probably can't dig into that right now. If we can, I'm more than happy to take a look at it later, but I would say just follow along for now. Honestly, the easiest thing might be just make a new directory. Make sure to use the mkdir command. Because sometimes if there's a typo, sometimes the easiest thing is just to do it again and then see if it works. So you could try making a different directory. Otherwise, we'll figure it out later. It's probably not like a read-only issue, but if you are running into that, then there may be some other wrinkle.
Thanks.
Totally. Yeah. And if anyone, if you want to chat with anyone on a side channel in Slack or anything, or if a TA wants to pop in to help, that would be great. But Josh, I would say just say follow along. So I'm going to re-add my example.js just because I deleted and brought it back to port. And now we're back to this same state. And let's go ahead and so there was a point about git rm cached in the chat. And that's not for stuff that we've staged. That's for stuff that is here in like untracked. And note that, oh no, I apologize. I'm wrong there. Talk about being easily confused. You're absolutely right in the chat. The git rm -- cached will unstage. I apologize. There's like a revert command. It all does get a little confusing, but git actually does give you hints. So if I want to unstage, if I change my mind, I don't want to commit this file, I would do git rm -- cached example.js, and the file is, oh, I have two. There we go. So that does not delete the file, but it moves it back into untracked, right? So that rm -- cache moves it from staged back into the untracked. But most of the time, we're just going to be adding stuff. And you guys have seen, I can add a single file. What's easier and what you'll probably want to do most of the time, because you'll only be working with one or two files and you'll probably always want to be adding everything, is the dot symbol represents everything in this current directory. So git add dot adds all this stuff, all these untracked files. And that's easier and probably what you're going to want to use most of the time. And now we've got all three of our files staged. Any questions or things people would like me to go over? Andrew, yes, sir.
Yeah, so maybe I'm jumping ahead, but once the JS code project is finally committed to GitHub. What is the command to? It's possible to unlink those, right? What is the command to unlink the GitHub from the JS code?
You mean from the Git repo that you have
Yeah.
on your computer?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That's a good question. So a couple things actually that are good to point out here. First off, although we are using VS Code for the terminal program, this stuff has nothing to do with VS Code. In fact, let me just in the Finder in Mac go to, and I'm really glad you asked, Andrew, because I know for a certainty other people are probably wondering about this as well, and this is always one of the big learning curves. So remember that the terminal and the shell let us interact with our files on our computer, with our file system. Now, for WSL2 Windows people, it's a little fuzzy because you've got like a virtual computer inside a computer. So I know that that can be a little confusing, but even then, it is still not the terminal and the VS Code where this stuff lives. It's on the imaginary hard drive, so to speak, of your Linux virtual machine. So I'm pulling up the Finder because I want to show I've got my projects directory. I've got my first repo and I've got these files here. And in fact, if I want to see hidden files on a Mac, I just Googled OSX show hidden files. Google is telling me if I do Command Shift dot, and I have no idea what the equivalent of this is on Windows, and we don't have to know. But look, there is the .git directory. It is just another directory whose name happens to start with a dot. And inside here, it's just files of text with stuff. And so to go back to your question, Andrew, I'm more than happy to show you how to do that later, but we actually would not want to do that because the whole point of a version control tool like Git is, what if I lose my computer? Then I am screwed and all my work is gone. So I always want some other Git repository somewhere else that I can push or send my code to, both for backup and so that other people can access it. And we just create lots of Git repos on our computer. So there's no need to unlink them in that way.
Copy. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And as you do it, it's a lot easier to do it and see it than explain it, to be honest. So once you do it a couple times, it's pretty intuitive. What other questions do people have? What's on people's minds? Cool. All right, let's commit. So we've done this. We've talked about sort of we're baking the cake. We know that we're creating a commit message here. So go ahead and please do this. And Git tells us we successfully committed on the main branch. Some notes here about this. If I type git status, branch main, nothing to commit, working tree, which I think really means our like working branch, clean, which is great. That's what you want to see. Git log, the history of our commits on this branch. And we've got my first commit. So we've gone from here to here, right? Everything has been committed. And now we've kind of cleaned everything up, right? Because once it's committed, the cake is baked and we can take it, or the muffins, right? We're waiting for the cake. The muffins are baked. We can take them out of the oven. So let's go ahead and make like one more commit. In fact, why don't we just, for the JS file, add another console log statement and say it's sunny or whatever the weather is where you are at the moment, which I hope is sunny. And if I type git status now, that file has been modified, right? Git is tracking that file. It tracks changes to it. If I type git diff all by itself, it shows me all the changes. In fact, let's add to the Python file as well. It's sunny. And we do have to save the file for Git to do this, because if you don't save it, the file hasn't actually changed. And now if I type git status, both of these files have changed. If I type git diff, which is short for difference, as in the difference between the last commit and the current state of our code base, we see these green bits in 2 files. And if I want to see the difference just for 1 file, I can just do that. I see the question, why is there a capital M next to file names? Oh, that's a great question. I never noticed that. That is VS Code giving us a little bit of information about the state of the Git repo, actually, which is not the worst thing. I'm hovering over and I see M is short for modified. And in fact, over here, notice that it says uncommitted changes. And in fact, it gives us all this information, which is kind of cool. And it's kind of useful. So here, if I get rid of this, that M should go away. Oh, I see. I got rid of an empty line. So now it's gone because I had a new line that was missing. So the M goes away because now the state of this example py file is exactly the same as the last commit. There are no modifications. That's actually a great question, Andrew. And actually this is kind of useful because this gives you information too. It gives you the exact same information you get with git status and with git diff, but you kind of get it in the editor. I'm so used to using the command line that I don't pay attention to the M. It's useful to know. Brian, the WQ with git diff, if it was like a really long message, then there's a little command line utility where we might have to like do W and Q. That comes from this editor Vim. That's I think a little more relevant with commit messages. Though you do have to hit Q sometimes if you have like a super long like message. Do folks have any questions right now about sort of what's going on with git status and git diff and the information that we're getting here? Cool. So let's go ahead and make another commit. Let's just add both of these changes. Git add, yeah, we can add both, why not? Git add dot. No, VS Code is still saying like, hey, these things are modified, though it's not saying unstaged changes. They are now staged. By the way, if you ever have to choose what to trust the Git program on the command line, not the VS Code stuff. But these are still uncommitted changes, but they are now staged, is what it's telling us. And we can, you know, we've got a commit history here, like my first commit. This is, I always find this a little confusing. If that said, if it helps you, then you absolutely should use it. And let's go ahead and make a commit. And let's just call this my second commit. And now if I do git log, I have this history of these two commits. If I want to use the extensions here and look at the commits, you can see like my first commit, and we could actually like go back in time to see stuff. The same way like we checking out a commit hash. But again, I do not use that sidebar all that much. What questions do people have? Are people starting to feel a bit more comfortable with adding, committing? Cool. You can use this tool to commit too if you want. There's little buttons and stuff you can press. And if that works for you, I would say go for it, as long as you kind of get comfortable with this workflow. I do recommend trying to stick with the command line, because honestly, it is not the worst thing to get practice on the command line. So now we're going to do a little branching and a little merging. So this is what our main branch looks like right now. We have all that stuff from that first commit captured here with the commit hash, and all that stuff from the second commit with the commit hash, and Git kind of like a pointer, right? Like if you're writing a for loop and you've got the variable I to iterate through an array, Git uses something called head, and this is a term that's been around for a while for like the head of a list, like a Python list. Like people will talk about heads and tails of lists. To keep track of the most recent commit, because I have to double check, but I think the way that Git works under the hood is like each commit kind of like points backwards to the last one. So if you have the head to the newest one knows the last one, and that's kind of how the links in the chain get connected. So we've got two commits, and the most recent one is the head of our branch. We are gonna make a new branch now. And if you want, by the way, you can do git log -- graph, and you can see a not that incredible sort of visual representation of stuff. But as a reminder, we're on our main branch. Let's create a new branch and use it, and we will call it, I believe the doc says what, my feature. Yeah, my feature. And this is a common strategy called the feature branch strategy for how do we create different branches. You're not going to have to create a ton of branches in class until the group projects. Again, branches are really good for backups, so you can keep your main branch where you know your program is working. And if you're going to mess around with stuff, and because part of the learning process is always, I just spent 2 hours and now nothing works, do it on a different branch so you can go back. We've created a new branch called my feature. If I type git status, I'm on the branch my feature. If I look at the history of this branch, it's the same as the main branch, because we branched off of it and it uses those same commits. Let's go ahead and make a change so we can get something interesting. And before I do this, do people have any questions?
I have one.
Please.
At what point do we push, I guess?
Yeah, that is a great question. I pretty much push after every commit all the time. The reason I have not been doing that now is because, remember, we created this repo this way with this git init command. This repo is not connected to any other Git repos, like say a repo on GitHub, which is exactly what you're thinking about. Like, all right, I've cloned a repo, I'm making some changes and I'm pushing it up. And that's exactly like the workflow. Like the push command takes these commits and sends them to another machine. So I do it. Normally this would be connected to a repo on GitHub. Like if I was doing real work, I would have made the repo on GitHub and cloned it, because I want to be able to send it to GitHub for backups and to share with other people and for all sorts of reasons. And then after every command, I would do git push. I think this is just going to fail right now. Yeah, because it says there's no, this Git repo is not connected to any others. It's not connected to a remote repo is the term. So in fact, what we can do in a bit is we can create a repo on GitHub and then connect this to it and push it up. But we'll see. My plan is to kind of like walk through this and then take a break. And then honestly, we'll kind of do this again, but we'll clone an assignment repo first and go through that whole process. So that's kind of what I want to do for the last hour before lunch. Yeah, great question, Clarice. Thank you. Because you're right. Normally I would be pushing after every commit. And there's really no reason just not to push all the time. For what we'll be doing here in the class. What other questions do people have?
I have a question. I just did with the git log, and at the end I got the exact same thing as you, but at the very end of it, that just says end, like where yours says Adam's MacBook Air, mine just says end, and I know I just hit Q and I can escape that, but is there some kind of maybe setting I can do so that doesn't happen all the time?
Off the top of my head, no. Just hit Q, honestly. I'm not sure. Maybe if I make my terminal smaller, it'll do that. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. So probably what's happening is there's a command line. And so this is what everyone, if you look at the bottom of my screen, this is what chat is seeing. I'll talk about what's happening in a minute, but essentially when the terminal doesn't have enough space, there's this little semicolon here and this little cursor. If I hit spacebar, it paginates, right? It goes through each page. And then when you get to the bottom of the page, you see end, and then you can hit Q to exit that. This is a really normal behavior of the shell and the terminal that happens with other programs as well. So it's worth getting used to. So I would just hit space and Q. And honestly, I don't know off the top of my head if there's a way to change it or not. And you see it like if I use this manual program, look at the manual page. Let's do something for man curl, right? Curl is a program to make an HTTP GET request. So this is a text file somewhere, and I'll talk about this. I won't go too far down the rabbit hole, but I'll briefly talk about this. And you see the exact same thing here, because there's this command line program called, I think it's called less, that is used for printing stuff to the terminal in pages, so that if something's really long, we can handle it. Because all this stuff was, again, written in like the 70s. And so I can page through this by hitting space. I can hit Q at any point to exit. I don't have to get all the way to the bottom. And in fact, let me open up another terminal so I don't lose track of where I am. So I'll do a brief tangent here and then we'll come right back. Perfect. So I opened up a new terminal, or rather, I guess a new shell session in the terminal because I didn't want to lose my place. But in here, I've cloned the curriculum repo and I've got, let me navigate into our lesson for today, in fact. I've got, these are the different markdown files, right? And I could use the command line editor Vim to look at one. I could use Nano to look at it if I wanted to exit it, look at it and stuff. But there is also this program called Less. Let's see if I'm using this right. There we go. Yeah. So Less is useful for when you want to print stuff out to the terminal, but it might be more stuff than that can fit on the screen, and Less does pagination for you. And I'm not getting, there it is. The same, note the same thing, the little colon, the cursor. I can go all the way down to the bottom. Eventually I'll hit end. You can use the up and down arrow keys too, if you want. It's just much slower. There's a bunch of other keyboard shortcuts, but really the space bar and then Q to quit at any time are the big ones. And so Git is actually using less when it does that, and that man page is using less. There's this whole Linux philosophy of like using these tools together, and that's why it's just worth getting used to it. So thank you all for being a little patient with my tangent there. And great question, Chad. Thank you for asking. What other questions do people have? Okay, cool. Let's keep on rolling. And I need to remember where I'm at. So I'm going to do git status. I'm going to do git log. Okay, now I remember. We created a branch, my feature. We haven't added anything to this branch yet. So let's go ahead and make a change to our Python file. And if you're following along with the curriculum doc, this should be right in line. And now if I type git status, of course, that file's been modified. Git diff shows me that that file's been modified. Git add dot will add that and all the other changes. And now let's commit. And I'll wait a minute just for people to do this to make sure everyone's caught up. And while I'm waiting, do folks have any questions? Yes, sir, Matt.
I might be jumping the gun here just because I got like a error. What's the difference between like a sub module and a branch?
Yeah, something has gone not in the direction that we want there. But this actually, I'm glad you mentioned this because this is a pretty common thing that pops up. So this is actually really good to mention. You can sort of stick a Git repo inside a Git repo. And that's sort of called a submodule. It is not a good idea. You don't want to do it. Most people don't. There are some good use cases for it, but they're kind of a pain. It definitely has its place, but generally speaking, you won't do it in this course. You probably won't run into it. It can cause a lot of confusion. So I'm not 100%, but if you're seeing something about a submodule, something like this has probably happened. Let's just.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I did. I put a repository in a repository by accident, and then it gave me that
Exactly.
error.
Yeah, and that's what you don't want to do. But it's really a common mistake because we're all learning the file system and the command line. So I can help you if you know that you can delete like the inner repository or the outer repository safely, then go for it.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and just to show everyone, like, if I do git init here, I've got a Git repo inside here. So the Git program looks in the current directory for that .git thing. I'm not going to add this, but that's what happens. Like I've got a Git repo here, and then this other directory with the Git repo inside that, and that is not what we want. Yeah, great question. So everyone, any other questions or issues people run into? Oh, sorry about that. So I'm running out of space a little bit here. There we go. That's better. So this is what our entire Git tree looks like right now. And the current state, because we're working on this my feature branch. And this special pointer head is always going to point to the head of the branch that we're working on. And this is our history. We did our first commit. We did our second commit. We created a new branch, but with no commits. And then we made that third one. So hopefully this helps illustrate a little bit how Git works under the hood. We're not going to need to do tons with this. It is really useful to have a decent mental model of what's going on though. And so I'd love to know what questions people have or what's on people's minds. And again, think about when I pulled up the Google Doc and we had the 3 versions. This is very much like that. Is there anything that people would like me to maybe step through again or talk a little more about? Cool. So we're just gonna keep on rolling, and I'm gonna use the Command R command line command to look through all those Git logs I typed, because one of them, that one, has what I want, and Control R searches through the history of everything you've typed on the command line. So I would have thought there was a little bit of branching that we should have seen here. Maybe because we're on the branch. That's okay. This feature is okay, not amazing. You know, with the Git extension in VS Code, you can see in here the names of the different branches. You can see all sorts of things. Git branch is the command just to list branches. That's probably an easy way to do it. And we can tell what branch is currently checked out because it's got this star next to it and it's green. So let's go back to the main branch. And again, remember, everything we've committed is saved in Git. In fact, I'm pretty sure, like, if I did something here and added it, I'm not sure it would let me change branches. Let's see if I have that right. No, I think it would, because it wouldn't delete it. There's certain cases, like Git does do a few things here and there to protect you from losing work that's not committed. But a lot of times you can just move around. So I'm going to check out the main branch. And when I do git checkout main, what's going to happen to this example.py file? Can someone tell me?
It should get rid of the goodbye moon, right? Because that was a
Yeah.
commit on a branch.
Exactly. It is kind of neat in VS Code. You can kind of hover to see like what changes are from what. There's something called like git blame or git history. That lets you see like for each line what's going on. It looks like it might be an extension or something. I'm not going to go down that road right now. You can see it in GitHub, but they're sort of showing it like if I wait here and hover, I can see like which commit each of these is from. So when I check out main, we're switching to the other branch, this goodbye moon commit. That's only on my feature branch. By the way, the git diff command, you can use it to compare previous commits. I can look at the difference between my code base now and one commit back, right? Head points to the most recent commit. This tilde is kind of saying backwards 1. So I can compare 1 commit back, 2 commits back. Not something you need to use all the time, but kind of nifty. So we've checked out main. Branch main, we lost that line. If I want to check out, I can use this dash to pop back and forth. Now let's get our work from our feature branch onto this main branch, right? And that's the one thing I didn't show that I definitely want to show is merging. So we've learned all these terms like branches, checkout, push, pull, merge. Merge is pretty much what it sounds like. We want to merge 2 things together. We had these 2 commits on the main branch, this commit on the feature branch. I want to bring this commit back onto the main branch, so I have all my work here, right? We can pretend I've done a whole lot of work on the feature branch. It's not just this one thing. So that's what a merge is. There's like additional complexities in kind of different ways to merge, but the basic essence of it is really simple. What we're gonna end up with is something like this. We're gonna bring that 1 commit back to this main branch, and Git's gonna add a little message for us. And I think it'll be easier. Let's walk through this step and see what happens. And then we can kind of look at a diagram. So I'm going to double check to make sure I'm where I want to be. I will share with everyone the script to get tab completion for branch names, because it does drive me a little nuts not having it for myself set up, to be honest. I'm going to double check the name of the branch I want to merge. Git merge my feature. And the merge command will always, the branch we're on now, we call the base branch. Think of like the base of a pyramid. We're gonna merge this on top. It's like the next level on our pyramid, the next level on our building. So we're merging all this stuff from the my feature branch onto this one. And the fast forward message is not really worth going into. It basically says, hey, this was easy to do and it's straightforward. We're told what changed, right? 1 file changed, 1 insertion. If I look here, goodbye moon is now here. That commit message is now here. If I do git status, I'm on the main branch. If I do git log, that commit. Now this commit was just 1 change in 1 file, but this could have been 5 changes across a whole bunch of files. And that's the power of Git. And we've got the commit message. So we didn't really need, like, sometimes Git will add an extra commit that just has a message. And if we look at our Git history, it could be interesting to see. Yeah, it's not quite showing me what I'd hope, but it's also pretty straightforward at this point, because we just kind of pulled it over, and now our main branch has all 3 of these commits. And this is the part that can feel a little funny, but you get used to it pretty quickly. And I want to pause here and see if people have any questions or what's on people's minds. Okay, cool. I think we should take a break because that way we can get up and stretch. And then when we come back, I'm thinking we can basically kind of walk through this again, but like with a repo on GitHub to see that whole flow. And Clarice, like you were saying, like do some Git push along the way. Does that sound good to folks? And are people starting to feel, again, Git is a complex tool and there's actually a lot of really interesting concepts embedded in it, but are people starting to get a little more comfortable with like the process of like adding and committing and doing that, and the basic idea of like a branch? Cool. The merging part I know can be a little funky. Matt, yes sir.
Quick question about like usernames in GitHub. So my username when I like push something to my GitHub, it's like different than my actual GitHub, if that makes sense. I think it's because like I have the like GH command and then git command, and my like git command has it says it has the right email and username and all that, but then when I like actually commit, it's using some random name.
I would have to check.
Okay.
I'm not super familiar with I have the GH command line tool. Short answer would be make sure you don't have two like GitHub accounts. Maybe like GH is using a different one.
Yeah.
That's what I would look into. Also maybe do a quick Google search on like how to configure like username and email for GH. But that's my first guess, because the Git username, your username is, you know, your GitHub account. And you can add more than one email address. So if you've added more than one email, then it could be. But if you're seeing a different username pop up, then my first thought is multiple accounts.
Yeah, that's what I think it might be. It looks like a whole different. I wasn't even thinking about that. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. All right, why don't we take, how does 10 minutes sound good, folks? Cool. And then I think we should have just enough time to dig into the rest of the flow, especially as we've seen a bit of this. So let's take 10 and then we'll do some cloning and pushing and pulling and all that fun stuff. Thank you, everyone, and see you all in 10.